Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this very special bonus episode together with Douglas, Squirrel, and Jeffrey Fredrick. Hi, guys. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Vasco. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
so
nice to see you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you both. Squirrel, that will be what we will call Douglas because he prefers that, and Jeffrey are also hosts of another podcast, Agile Conversations. I'll put the link up on the show notes so that people can go
It's actually called, for funny historical reasons, it's called Troubleshooting Agile, but the book is called Agile Conversations.
Absolutely.
And then the website is called something else. Sorry, we haven't got our branding. We're not in branding.
That's when you see a true engineer. So we'll definitely put the link to all of those on the show notes for sure. But let me introduce you, Douglas Squirrel first. Squirrel has been coding for 40 years and has led software teams for about 20, and he uses the power of conversations, we'll talk a lot about conversations today, to create dramatic productivity gains in technology organizations of all sizes. Squirrel's experience includes growing software teams as a CTO in startups from fintech to biotech to music and everything in between. And something I'm sure our listeners will cherish, he lives in Frogholt, England, in a timber-framed cottage built in the year 1450. Wow. So in other words, Squirrel, you live in a house that is older than many kings are. Like,
yes.
How many kings have existed since 1450 in the Kingdom of United? Or is it United
I have not
Kingdom?
counted them. Couldn't tell you. A lot.
But that just tells you live in a house with history. Wow.
That is true.
Yeah, I'm jealous because Squirrel's house is more interesting than I am. So
More interesting than he.
Not at all true.
Absolutely, but that is definitely something worth mentioning in a bio. So I appreciate that. All right, and Jeffrey Fredrick is an internationally recognized expert in software development and has over 25 years experience covering both sides of the business technology divide. An early adopter of XP, that's for extreme programming, not Windows XP for your young folks out there. And agile practices, Jeffrey has been a conference speaker in the US, Europe, India, and Japan. Japan I've never done. That is interesting. Through his work on the pioneering open source project CruiseControl, which, by the way, was the first, I think we call it a build system at the time, but, continuous build system, automated build system, and then later on integration as well, continuous integration system, CruiseControl. And through his role as a co-organizer of the Continuous Integration and Testing Conference, CITCON, he has had a global impact on software development. And I have to say that just you being part of the CruiseControl project would be enough to have a global impact on software development. That was the beginning of CI/CD for many of us.
yeah, I think so. It was fun to get on the ground floor of that, what became such a major part of, and just sort of done almost table stakes now of software development.
And of course, thankfully, these days we have many CI/CD systems. They are not servers anymore. They are entire systems filled with pipelines, integration with version control, dashboards, all kinds of stuff that have been developed over time, which is brilliant because that's actually something that really changed how we develop software, how we develop and deliver software these days. Okay, but we're not here to talk about technical practices, although I'm sure we will touch on those as we go. Before we get started with the book is Agile Conversations that Squirrel and Jeffrey wrote, and I think is very important for Scrum Masters to be aware of. And we'll dive into the book in a second. Before we get started, though, I'd like you, Squirrel, to share with our audience what is your current view of the Scrum Master role. I'll share later why I think it's important for our listeners to hear your view, but go ahead, Squirrel.
So I'm on record as saying that the Scrum Master role is superfluous. Now, that's dangerous for a couple of reasons, so I got to qualify it, and especially in front of this audience who might start throwing tomatoes. First of all, I said the role, not the person. So I think Scrum Masters are amazing folks, and that's why I wanted to come and be on the podcast with you and Jeffrey and talk about Scrum Masters and talk to them. But I can't work out what the role is for. And I've really tried, and I've met a lot of Scrum Masters, and I can't figure out what good the role is. Now, you, Vasco, came on our podcast, and you convinced me in a very small way. They managed to get me to move a little bit, that there are situations where a team is so dysfunctional and has so many problems that they really need that the organization is functioning poorly, that the skills are missing, that there are lots of things that aren't as they should be. And then a Scrum Master can plug a hole. And that I'm convinced of. So you've managed to move me a little bit, but I am still a big Scrum Master skeptic. And I had somebody just yesterday, someone I was coaching, asking, so we're thinking of bringing in a Scrum Master. And I said, I can't see what that's going to solve for you. And that's commonly my response. Now, I'm willing to change it. I'm open. I have a strong opinion weakly held. So I'm willing to continue to move my position. But that's where I'm starting.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I wanted Squirrel to share this view with you, our community of Scrum Masters out there, is that unfortunately, the way the role is set up in many organizations naturally becomes superfluous. And it's not the first company that I work with that decides to fire all the Scrum Masters. And here comes the dangerous part, and hire project managers. And this is a huge problem for the teams, because if they weren't dysfunctional before, I guarantee it's not going to take long after hiring a PMO and a bunch of project managers for the teams to start to become dysfunctional. Now, there's many reasons why that will happen, but the important thing to understand is that project managers are hired because in the heads of the decision makers, they get shit delivered. And this is a very important aspect for Scrum Masters to have in mind, because very often we forget that we don't just work with teams, we work with the whole organization and what the teams deliver. What's their impact in the organization? So my call to action to all of our Scrum Masters is to focus on the impact of their work. Are the teams delivering? And if not, why not? And go solve those problems rather than try to only get better at retrospective facilitation, which is part of the tools we have in our toolbox, of course, but it's not enough if we have great retrospectives, but the teams are still not delivering, because sooner or later project managers will be hired and will replace the Scrum Master role.
That's a really interesting way you describe it, Vasco, because it sort of, one thing that occurred to me is you talk about working with the team, and I naturally wanted to finish the sentence for the company. You're working with the team, but for the company, and your point is you need to be fulfilling, adding value for the company, and that comes into what's the actual outcome that matters, which is the outcome. Are we getting the outcomes we want from the teams? And usually, a very important part of that is delivery.
Absolutely. I mean, no one would argue with a team that might be dysfunctional, but still delivering. This is a very important aspect to recognize. Like, sometimes dysfunctions are bad, but not significant. Mm-hmm. And Scrum Masters focusing on those dysfunctions rather than focusing on what prevents teams to deliver becomes an anti-pattern of the Scrum Master role. And there I'm totally with Squirrel on the point that if that becomes your only focus as a Scrum Master, then your role will become superfluous. You will eventually lose the job, and project managers will be hired. Because don't forget that project managers are specifically trained to make teams deliver whether they like it or not. And sometimes that's what companies want. They don't care about the dysfunction, they care about delivery. Now, we have the advantage as Scrum Masters to work on the dysfunctions and help the teams deliver. So it should be a no-brainer that a Scrum Master role would be much better than a project management role if the Scrum Master would be focusing on delivering, on the team delivering rather, as much as the Scrum Master is focusing on this function. So I wanted to have this conversation early on because I think this is also a great context for the book you guys wrote. In your book, Agile Conversations, you start with a very important statement, which I think it's right on the cover, actually, which I think is very important for Scrum Masters, which is transform conversations, transform your culture. What do you guys mean by that? Let's start with Jeffrey this time.
Okay, sure. Well, I think we mean this a couple ways. And one of the most direct ones is simply it comes to the question of what is your culture, and the culture is a function is really of how everyone interacts with each other all the time, and those interactions, your conversations are the stuff of your culture. Then they are how people interact with one another. So whether you change those conversations on sort of even the topic of the conversation, to take the example you were just talking about, if you went from having the conversation be about, how was this last week for everyone, to, do we think we're actually delivering well? You're actually creating a different culture by changing the conversation, just even the topic, let alone then as we get into the quality of the conversation. Because I would say our goal is to have what you call a generative culture, using the Westrum culture typologies, and that sort of mission-oriented, outcome-oriented, generative culture that has a different types of interactions between people. It's not just different topics, but even the quality of the interactions. There's so much more learning that happens in those. And so trying to set up a learning culture requires learning conversations.
Squirrel, what are your thoughts on that subtitle that either you or your editor came up with?
I think it was Jeffrey. Jeffrey comes up with all the good things. Like the title of the book was Jeffrey's. He was getting off a bus and he was on the phone with us, and we were thinking of writing 2 books, and one was called Troubleshooting Agile and the other was Difficult Conversations. And he said, "I've got to get off the bus, but why don't we try one book called Agile Conversations?" and hung up. That was where the title of the book came from. So Jeffrey, I'm sure that subtitle must have been you. It wouldn't have been the publisher, I don't think. So I don't have a lot to add to Jeffrey's insights. I guess the one thing I'd say is culture is somewhat of a dangerous word. It'd be easy to say, oh, yes, we're just going to fix our culture and then suddenly everything will be better. I tend to be an empirical kind of person and to look for specifics that we can work on. And that's one of the things we really wanted in the book. Unlike 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which describes a lot of the same concepts, but without telling you anything to do, makes me very angry. Agile Conversations gives you very specific steps you can follow in order to transform your conversations, which will then have the results that Jeffrey talked about that come from transforming your culture, having the generative culture you're trying to get to. That's what our focus was. What could we actually do? What could you concretely do with pieces of paper, pens, folding paper in half, writing things down that actually changes how your conversations work? And that's what I hope we achieved in the book.
That's brilliant for our audience because, of course, our podcast is called The Toolbox exactly because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for tools to put in our toolbox, just like a carpenter won't use a hammer when a saw is needed. It's also important to know that when we're having those conversations, we also need to reach out for the right tool. So here on the podcast, we often talk about how the role of the Scrum Master is so important as being part of those conversations, because we are constantly part of those conversations that are going on in the company, whether they are inside the team, outside the team, between the team and stakeholders, wherever they are. And we need to learn, of course, as Scrum Masters, to get into the right conversations. That's one aspect. We also need to find where they are, because they are not necessarily coming to us. We might need to dig and, talk to people, observe, and figure out what they are. So the question for you guys, let's start with you, Squirrel. How do we find and enter, so become part of those critical conversations that happen in the organizations we work in?
Sorry, you broke up for just a second. I hope I'm hearing you right. So how do we, just to make sure I understand the question, how are we getting involved in those conversations? Are you saying that Scrum Masters feel excluded from the key conversations? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so I would suggest that one of the skills we need to develop as Scrum Masters is to actually being able to find them, right? Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily come to us, right? We need to find where those conversations are ongoing. So how do we find them? How do we enter those conversations? So how do we become part of those conversations as well?
Understood. So one of the biggest challenges that I see for folks in particularly large organizations is their own fear, and overcoming their fear of going and finding the conversation. So I will tell somebody, well, why don't you go and take that to the head of finance? Why don't you take that to the CEO? And they say, well, I could never do that. Those people wouldn't talk to me. And the danger there, the fear that is causing that person, I think, a problem, there's a tool missing in their toolbox, is the tool of testing. Because I say, oh, you mean you went and tried to book a time with that person? They refused. You went and knocked on the door of their office and they said no. And they say, no. I mean, I just couldn't do that. And I say, so which part of your keyboard is broken? Is it the part where you type the @ sign, where you would put there? Do you not know their email address? Could you not find their phone number? And they say, well, no, Squirrel. What I mean is our culture is such that we couldn't do that. And that comes down to the fear that person has of starting the conversation. When people overcome that fear and overcome the social norm, which is not to be discounted, right? It's usually quite a high bar. It's a significant social norm. I could never do that. Comes from somewhere. They learned that. That's a learned behavior. When they overcome that, they often find out interesting stuff. Sometimes they find out, actually, that person would love to talk to you and is very keen and is very interested in having the conversation. So then you have the problem of how to have the conversation, which is what the rest of the book is about. And sometimes you find out that social norm is really valid. That person does not want to talk to you. That person thinks it's very negative to speak to you, and that is not helpful. That leads to all kinds of other interesting conversations with that person or somebody else, and might lead to your reflection about whether that's the organization for you ultimately. But the main thing that I usually find when people tell me, well, I couldn't get into that conversation, I can't be part of that conversation, I can't do that, is they haven't tested it. So that's my first challenge to your audience is, if you're saying that I'm not part of this conversation and I can't be, do you have evidence for that? If you do, then we have an interesting problem. We have different people to talk to, different conversations to have. But I suspect you probably haven't tested it.
How about you, Jeffrey? What comes to mind, and what tools do you have to share about finding and becoming part of those critical conversations?
Well, I certainly agree with Squirrel that people are usually self-inhibited, what Chris Argyris would call a self-sealing belief. In other words, their belief that they can't be part of the conversation prevents them from acting to be part of the conversation. One thing I use as a guide is frustration. And I would say, so when you're talking to the team and the team is frustrated, that's something to listen to, or when you're frustrated. Now, the reason for that is that frustration usually is a sign that people believe the problem is somewhere else. Very rarely do people say, I'm really frustrated about not going to the gym. I keep not going to the gym every day, and I'm really frustrated by that. So when they feel that they have agency, they're not frustrated. So frustration is a sense that the problem is somewhere else. And so then it's a question, well, where is that? Who is that who would own whatever it is we're blocking? Very often, what I find is that the key conversations aren't happening at all. So there's often people have the feeling that, there are these conversations that are happening elsewhere. Things are being decided elsewhere. It's kind of an implicit assumption. Well, they must be. In my experience, actually, a lot of times those conversations actually aren't happening anywhere.
Can you give an example, Jeffrey? Like, what do you mean by them not happening?
Sure. I'll give an example of. You were talking before about the importance of measuring outcomes, of wanting to know what's the outcome of our work, and so I think the question of, well, how will we know if this is successful? How when we deliver this, how will people know? And it's common that actually there's been no conversation in the company to answer that question. So maybe people decided, oh yes, this is a good thing to do. We want this capability to be added to our to the company, to a website, whatever it is. But there hasn't been any thought given to, well, how will we know if it worked or not? Will we see? Will more money come in immediately? Will more money come in eventually? Will we see usage? Will we see change in behavior? What is going to change in the world because we deliver this? That's to me is a very critical conversation if you are performance and outcome oriented. However, I will say that it's pretty common that conversation hasn't happened in the company.
And that actually highlights something in my mind. Like, we are, like, Scrum Masters, we should also be looking for the conversations that aren't happening that we could trigger, right? Like, yes. You just said a great example. Very often we just, you get this infinite list of things into your backlog and you have to work on them. And, very often nobody remembers anymore why they are there, but they are there and you need to deliver them because somebody added them there and they are prioritized. So it must be the right thing to do, right? But nobody's asking that question exactly like you did. So are we getting more money now, more money later, more customers, more leads? People use it more often? Like, what are we trying to get out of this, right? So I think this is a great example of also another aspect of these conversations, which is that we as Scrum Masters need to also be looking at what conversations are not happening, right? I don't know if you guys mentioned it, certainly in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, they talk about lack of attention to results or lack of accountability. Like accountability is a conversation that needs to happen, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes, exactly. And the lack of accountability is rooted in a lack of conflict. And I think that's often kind of it aligned with what Squirrel said. Well, if I go talk to those people, there's a potential for conflict, and so let's avoid that. That's sort of defensive reasoning, and so it's that chain from the book that a lack of conflict leads to a lack of commitment. A lack of commitment leads to a lack of accountability. Lack of accountability means inattention to group results. It precisely that chain, and it's rooted all behind it. The very base of that 5 dysfunction model is the lack of trust. And this is very much akin to psychological safety, which is, do I feel an obligation to share my point of view? Amy Edmondson described this in one of the podcasts, a felt permission for candor, which is that people will want to hear what I have to say, and they will take it in the spirit of achieving the mission of adding value. And if we believe that we'll be interpreted that way, it's easier for us to go out and have those conversations and surface any potential conflict, which we want to then result in alignment and commitment that people share. And that's what then, gets us this virtuous interactions of commitment and then accountability and then attention to group results.
So actually, this is a very interesting point, right? So it all starts with the idea that some conflict is not only good, it's critical for the success of the team and the organization.
Absolutely.
We teach a whole session. We do a whole workshop on mining for conflict, on looking for conflict. Conflict is a valuable thing, and you want to have more of it.
That's right. And it's very much rooted in trust, in the ability to well, first of all, that you'll be curious about what people say, and that you will be transparent about sharing your thoughts, even if you think people might disagree. And part of this, I think, is about letting go of the idea of winning a conversation, of getting your way as the goal. To say, I'm going to go in this meeting and convince people that we need to do this.
I don't let my coaching clients use the word convince.
Yeah, that's a sign that you have the wrong mindset. But to go in and say, I'm going to share my view, I want to learn their view, and our goal is to see if we can come out aligned. Now, our goal, as we come in, we might have different points of view. We might leave with different points of view, and that can be okay. But I want to understand where we disagree, not just that we disagree.
Okay, so let me take that forward, because of course the next question is about tools. So how do we transform this into a set of tools we can use to get into those conversations and to find productive and insightful conversations with our teams and stakeholders? We just heard that mining for conflict is one of those tools. And of course, with all of the things we said before, right? Like there's enough trust to have that conflict, that our goal is not to win an argument, but rather to create progress within the team or the organization. So what are some of the tools we can learn as Scrum Masters that help us to have those more productive and more insightful conversations with teams and stakeholders?
Well, you're going to need some complex equipment. Let me tell you, there's some significant materials. You're going to need months of training and tons of, no, actually, you don't need certification or anything else. What you need is a pen and a piece of paper and the ability to fold the paper in half.
And you're referring to a tool, Douglas, Squirrel, I should say. So let's get the tool out in the open. I'll put the link to it in the show notes.
How about this, Squirrel? Because I think there's 2 tools I'd like to talk about here. I'm going to talk about the general one, which is the 4 R's, and then I'm hoping Squirrel will follow up with a second tool, which that he uses quite a lot, which is TDD for people. So
I'd be happy to. Yeah, you take us away on conversational analysis.
Right. So so the book itself is centered around one particular tool, and it's actually kind of a meta tool, which is a tool of conversation analysis. And the idea is we use this piece of paper that we fold in half to give ourselves two columns to record a conversation, or particularly the juicy parts of the conversation, the part where the conflict is happening, or where you're frustrated, where things you're not getting the results you were hoping for. And then we have this framework thing called the 4Rs, which the 4Rs are record, reflect, revise, and role play. And then also you might repeat and do role reversal. Okay, so there's actually 6 4Rs, but it's not a maths textbook. So you have these 4 steps of conversation analysis, and that's kind of a meta idea that we'll use throughout the book. It's a generic tool for learning from your conversations, and then throughout the book we'll apply it with different tools. So this is kind of a meta tool. You can think about it's kind of adaptable, and then you can plug in a different tool at the reflect and revise step. So you're always recording it in the same fashion, but then you're going to take kind of like using a different lens. You're going to look at the conversation a different way based on what you're trying to achieve. And one of those lenses is hopefully what I set up Squirrel for here, which is the TDD for people concept.
Yep. So if you're going to take your conversation in a new direction, one of the things you might be really interested in doing, and one of the things we'd encourage you to do for our very first type of conversation we cover in the book, the trust conversation, we'd encourage you to do 2 things that Lencioni talks about in the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, but doesn't tell you how to do. It's one of those frustrating areas that made me throw the book across the room. That in order to have trust, you want to understand what the other person's story is, and you want to have them understand your story. If you have aligned stories, then you're getting somewhere. That's our definition of trust. And the challenge is how do you share those things? People have this terrible bias, this cognitive bias that causes them to think that they can read each other's minds. So Vasco, you might be thinking to yourself, Squirrel is feeling very calm right now. He's describing this and he's in kind of a teacher mode. That's how he's thinking. Or you might be thinking, Squirrel is very agitated. He just had to get a charger for his computer. And so he's out of breath and not very centered and not on top of things. You have no way of knowing what I'm actually thinking or feeling. There is no way for you to know that. But if you had one of those hypotheses, it would be very hard for you to shake it. And I don't know which you have. I have a completely different one. That's my hypothesis about you. But the crucial thing is that the bias is to believe that you know what the other person is thinking or feeling. And that's what leads you to say things like, well, the CEO would never talk to me. That this wouldn't be okay. I'd get in trouble with my boss if I went up to the head of product, something like that. And you don't know those things. Those aren't confirmed. So TDD for people, just like test-driven development when you're actually writing code, if you see your developers in your team writing code and they're using test-driven development, ask them what their feeling is as they're doing it. And they'll say, boy, this is kind of slow, but I feel very confident. Because what TDD gives you is kind of the feeling of, if you're walking across, say, a shaky, rickety bridge, and you might be holding on to the 2 railings very tightly, and, making sure that you just take one step and you're still holding onto a railing, then you let go of one, but you're still holding onto the other, and you get the next one. You have that kind of safe feeling that I'm always anchored. I always know what's happening. And what TDD for people gives you is that feeling as you go through a conversation. So you can, of course, read the book, read our blog posts, and listen to our podcast for details. But what you do roughly is to start with things that you can see or hear, start with data that's observable, and then move in that gentle, careful, test-driven development kind of way to test each step along the way. So I might say to you, let's say at Vasco, I was forming a hypothesis that you think we're going on too long, that I'm worried that you might think that our podcast here is going on for too long. I might say, Vasco, I noticed we've been going for about 20 minutes. Is that right? And you notice I start with something we could see and hear and we could agree on. And you might say, actually, Squirrel, we've been going for 45. And I say, wow, boy, I had no idea. Or you might say, actually, we've only been going for 5. either case, I'm learning a new thing that completely changes the whole rest of my reasoning, right? That I might not think we're going on to. In one case, I might think we're way over. In another case, I might not. And then I might say, so an important part of that for me is that we said we'd go for about half an hour. Do you agree that that's what we said originally, Vasco? And you might say, no, actually, you misheard me, Squirrel. I said an hour and a half. We've just gotten started. I got 20 more questions. Again, that would change my opinion. Those are red tests. So those are tests where I'm doing the test and I'm getting a red result. I'm finding out that the hypothesis I had doesn't match your story. And therefore, we have an important disagreement way before whether we're going over time on this podcast. Then I might continue up the ladder. I might get to the final step. And I might say, so I think that means that if we're this much over time and you need to get to someplace else and your podcast is usually this long, it sounds like we should wrap up. Do you agree, Vasco? What do you think about that? Then I'm getting to the action and the conclusion. But I have all the information before that, right? I can include all the reasoning and see how we're getting to the point where we might decide to finish. Now, I don't think we're over time or anything, so I'm just making up this silly example based on what we're doing right here. But you can imagine how you would apply that to a real situation like, I think our team is going to miss our sprint goals by 3 days. I'm concerned that marketing won't be able to market the product that we've just built. I'm worried that we might be building something that isn't meeting customers' needs. All of those types of topics, you might be drawing those conclusions about what someone else is thinking, and you could go explore that with them and also share your own way of thinking about it with this kind of careful testing. So that's a very brief summary of the technique. You can get a whole lot more detail on it by any of those means that I was talking about before.
Yeah, I will definitely put the link to the blog, the podcast, and of course the book as well, so that people can go and reflect on that, read and reflect on that, and especially how to apply it to our role as Scrum Masters. And talking about reflection, so one of the things that I see people who have read the book highlight in their reviews is what some people call a self-inspection framework. Now, I know that the 4Rs and TDD for people are also helping us doing inspection on the spot, understanding what's going on in the conversations. But for me, what I wanted to get your perspective on is how the concepts and the ideas in the book can help us as Scrum Masters do that self-inspection. And of course, the goal would be to have higher quality conversations, to start conversations that are critical but are not going on, and sometimes to troubleshoot conversations, which was one of your working titles. Because the idea is indeed that sometimes conversations just start going in the wrong direction, perhaps because people haven't been doing TDD for people, right? And they have been jumping to the conclusion and not really double checking that they actually have the same understanding. So how can we use the content, the ideas, the frameworks in your book to help us as Scrum Masters reflect and be better at these conversations?
I would start with sort of a foundational case that we make in the book early on, before we get into the specific tools, is the concept that we are part of the conversations, and that the conversation, the outcome is an emergent property. So we are contributing to it. So are other people. And in part, other people are responding to what we are doing, that you have this is a dynamic system. And that if any one element changes, any one person changes behavior, well, the whole conversation has the potential to be different. And that means that each of us has agency. And that means, in a way, if we're not getting the outcomes we want, there's a sense in which it's our fault. Now, for me personally, I like that. I aim to be a high agency person. I want to have a lot of control over what I do. Now, part of the way I achieve that is to have the belief that if things are not going well, it is my fault. There's something that I could be doing. And I often think in terms of this, that, look, there's got to be someone in the world that if they were in my role, they could influence the situation. And so there's the behavior that they would take, and I may not know what it is. And there's my behavior. And between those things, there's a gap. And if I were to close that gap, if I were to change myself, then I would be getting those outcomes that they would get. Now, if I put that in the frame of mind, then suddenly it's like, well, okay, well, I should then therefore be looking at what I'm doing and considering what I could be doing differently. And that self-reflection mindset is the spirit in which the book is written, and hopefully we get that across early on, and that we have a role to play, and that when we change our part in the conversation, the entire conversation changes. Because I'll say this very often, an objection that people have is they say, well, everything you say sounds great. I love all this stuff about productive conversations. and yes, that mining for conflict sounds great, and TD for people sounds great. But if I'm the only person who does it, that doesn't seem like it would help. Don't we need everyone to do this? Doesn't everyone need to be on board? Or even worse, doesn't management need to be on board? Doesn't this have to come top down? What could I do? And that's a point of view that we reject, both in theory and in experience. And I know this is often the material that Squirrel is coaching people with in different levels of the organization. And I don't think his coaching is ever, just keep doing what you're doing and wait for other people to change. Have you ever given that advice, Squirrel?
Never. And I don't think it would be very successful if I did.
So it's always a question of what could I, the only thing I can control is my own behavior. So the only question to ask is, what could I be doing differently? And to fit with, in terms of the podcast, I think it fits very well. What are the tools I'm missing in my toolbox, right? Other people who have more skill or more experience, they have tools that I don't currently have, or they're using them in a different way that I've never considered. So let me either add some tools to my toolbox or learn to use the tools I already know of more skillfully. And I think that's the last point I would make on this, which is that when you talk about having tools, it's not possible to separate the tool from the skill, right? It's not enough to own the tool. You need the skill to operate it. And so I can give you, someone brought me the carpenter's toolkit. I'm not going to be very good at making a chair because I've not practiced that. So the element of the book that we emphasize quite a bit is that these things we're talking about are not just mental models. They're not just concepts. If you hear about them and go, oh, that's great, I now know about TD for people, I now have that in my toolbox. No, you don't. You only have it if you start practicing with it, if you develop those skills. Now, it doesn't take a huge amount of time to get value. You can start getting value right away. I use the analogy sometimes with snow skiing. You have, how long does it take someone to learn how to snow ski? Well, there's different challenges, right? There's some green beginner slopes. There's blue square intermediate slopes. There's black diamond advanced. There's double black diamond. And someone says, well, how long will it take me to learn to ski? Like, that's almost a nonsensical question. I mean, you do it in an hour. You can come down this slope in an hour. But if you want to say, well, how long will it take me to come down that mountain? Like, well, even then,
how many lifetimes do you have?
Exactly. Well, it also depends. What route are you going to take? Some of them are easier than others.
Indeed.
So, and I think these conversational skills are like that. Some conversations are very hard. If I suddenly get attacked by surprise by my boss in front of people and I'm embarrassed, that's going to be a very hard conversation. I better have done a lot of practice to handle that with grace.
That's the black diamond.
Yeah, it's a black diamond.
Double black diamond. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But you're in conversations with your team every single day. And many of those conversations are just absolutely green, beginner slopes. So start using the skills, start making those, you have a chance to make every conversation better. And then there's value in making every one of them better. And as you hone those skills, before you know it, you're going down the intermediate slopes and you're having these dramatic changes. And then you're gearing yourself up over time to be able to handle some of those really extreme challenges. But there's huge amount of value, I find, just from the very beginning.
And let me add two things to that. The first is that we don't want to overpromise. So what we're not saying is, if you're in a giant organization that's hugely dysfunctional and really isn't doing very well and has a myriad of problems, simply by adopting by yourself a new technique, that you will suddenly make the whole organization a bunch of happy unicorns who will all live happily ever after. That's not what we need. So we're not promising that. But I can tell you that, for example, I have a client right now who is absolutely frustrated with someone else in his organization. Just the level of venting is tremendous. His empathic needs are very high. because every time I phone him up to do a coaching call, he says, "Oh, let me tell you what X did this time, and let me tell you, he's really psychotic now. He's really gone over the edge. He's complete break with reality." This situation seems intractable. It seems that there's nothing that can be done. And it may be that this person actually is psychotic, right? It is actually possible. There are people who are disassociated from reality and whose demands of other humans are unrealistic. That is a possibility. But just as I said when we got started, this person hasn't tested that. And so what I'm helping him to do is overcome his fear, which is keeping him from having the conflict with this person in which he shares some of those very negative views and some of the things that are really troubling him, and gets a chance to test the receptivity of this person to change. It may be that he will discover this person is not able to change, but he will never know that for certain. He will just have the kind of reassuring venting that he's doing. He will never know unless he tests with this person, with a conversation, a really effective conversation, whether change is possible. So what I like to say is that the conversations and the mining for conflict and the tools unlock for you the possibility of change. They make it possible for something to improve. They don't make it improve, but you're not going to be any worse off, right? This guy is already tremendously frustrated, and he's supposed to be having the conversation today, I think. So I'll be very interested to hear at our next coaching call what happened.
Absolutely.
I really want to know.
That reminds me of one thing, or that highlights one of the things that I wanted to kind of put forward to our listeners, is that we need to be deliberate about having these conversations. It's okay to be afraid, and it's even okay to postpone until you feel that you can handle the conflict. Mm-hmm. What is not okay is to ignore it, let it go, repress it, and act as if it isn't there, because things are what they are, whether we like it or not. And to Jeffrey's point, it is our decision to take agency or not into our own hands, right? So it's a very important point for us as Scrum Masters. So guys, we're about to finish, unfortunately. I think this podcast wanted to go a bit longer, but we are running out of time. But I did want to ask from both of you, let's start with Squirrel, one last word of advice for our Scrum Master friends, and where can they find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, I'll let Jeffrey do the where to find out more, because I'm going to actually take this moment to give you a warning. You might want to turn off the podcast now, because I'm about to infect you with an idea, and you can't unhear this idea. We believe that if you mine for conflict, if you look for opportunities to improve your conversations, if you practice, not necessarily, maybe get to the blue square, don't have to get to the double black diamond. If you do those things, you can really improve your culture. And very few other sources will tell you what you actually have to do. They'll tell you a lot about diagnosis, not much about cure. So the idea I'm going to infect you with now is that there are some crazy people who actually think that you can do something about these problems. And so now the obligation I'm going to put on all your listeners is the next time somebody says, "Oh man, we just couldn't do anything about that. I mean, that's just how our company is. Just the culture is like that." Your obligation is to say, well, whether or not you agree with us, whether or not you think we're barking up the wrong tree, say, well, I did hear some crazy people who think that actually can change. And if I can eradicate that hopelessness, that kind of learned helplessness that people have, there's nothing I can do about it. There's no way that I can improve this situation. If we can do that, that'll be a life's work well accomplished. So there's my peroration for you. But Jeffrey, what would you say as a final thought?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing we'll say is that some people have come to us after reading the book and say, I read the book, but one thing that was confusing to me is that, this isn't really about Agile, is it? I mean, there's nothing here that's specifically about Agile. And we said, you're right, because actually these are things that are true anytime you have humans involved, because the skills we're talking about, the problems are rooted in human psychology and the solutions are rooted in human behavior. And so the benefits we're talking about getting here apply not only to your work environment that you're in today, your software environment, but any work environment you're in the future where there's humans. In fact, the rest of your life, anytime you're dealing with other humans. And that some people have told us already that they have found this that they're getting more value out of it in their personal lives than in their work lives. So I think that's as a message here. I would say these are some skills. If you ever find yourself, if you believe in the future you'll be dealing with humans, then I think that this is an area worth looking at and developing these skills. As for where you can find us, there's we can find us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on the website Conversational Transformation, and we actually really like hearing from people. We even have a Slack channel that people could join if they want to ask us questions directly, and they can also, on the Conversational Transformation events page, they can find out places we're going to be, including twice a month we have I run a meetup where people have the chance to practice these conversational skills. So,
and we should say that's an online meetup, so global audience very welcome.
Yes, absolutely. So many ways to get in touch, and we'd love to hear from people. We'd love to hear also where people, to be clear, we'd love hearing where people disagree, where they have questions, and say, well, what about our situation? And so we'd love to hear from any of your listeners who had some of that reaction in listening to us.
Absolutely. Well, Squirrel and Jeffrey, thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica, for having us. It's been quite fun to have this conversation.
Indeed.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.